Morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me and for Anne for inviting me on today. So I'm Heather Davies. I'm a freelance content and copywriter, and I essentially help companies communicate their social and environmental impact for engagement, and in particular without greenwashing. And in practice, that means that I write things like voluntary impact reports, and I also do some brand journalism on social and environmental themes. I've also co-written and deliver a carbon literacy training course for marketing professionals to really upskill people, educate them on climate, and give them the tools that they need to be able to communicate effectively about it. But I think, first of all, it would be really good to hear a little bit about who's in the room, because I don't really know any of you other than Anne. So I am actually just going to stop my screen share for a second and ask you a few questions, and just perhaps answer by a show of hands to start with. So the first question is, how many of you are taking environmental or social action within your business? Yeah, one, two, three. Probably possibly more of you than that, but let's okay, so maybe a bit less than half. And of those of you who are, how many of you are communicating what you're doing? Got some shakes of the head, so perhaps nobody is communicating. Okay. And then this is one where I might get you to come off mute for a second. And of those of you who are doing things but aren't communicating them, what is it that's holding you back at the moment?
I'd say
My,
time.
Okay, yeah, because you're busy running a business, so you don't feel like you have the time to communicate on this. Yeah, Nigel?
my business is probably too small at the minute to communicate what I'm actually doing, but it will be something I want to build into my communication as I hopefully grow.
Okay. There was a couple of other people. Bernie, were you taking action?
I talk a lot about, like, I'm a one person global operation, um
Okay,
and I talk a lot about this stuff, um and we recycle and we work from home. So,
okay,
there's a lot. If I didn't recycle, I think I'd be in a lot of trouble with my child and wife. So, but there's a lot that happens, so it's more showing other people the path
yeah.
than actually, signing up to United Nations global sustainability goals and measuring my output.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
there's perhaps a bit of modesty or misunderstanding going on here, Heather, because a lot
Okay.
of our conversations every week are to do with finding ethical and sustainable ways of running our businesses. Using Ecosia instead of Google, having sustainable websites that we covered in a couple of weeks ago, using ethical banking. But there's all kinds of things that everybody in this group is doing.
Okay.
Perhaps it's just become part of the business now. And although everybody wants to do more, there is this issue of, you get signed into a Google suite, and trying to unpick everything looks like too big a task, but there's a willingness there to change.
Yeah.
And definitely lots of research going on into how to do things in the least damaging way possible.
Okay, well, that's a really good start. And it's kind of what I suspected, which is that most of you are taking action, but perhaps don't know how, or as you said, Annie, perhaps don't have the time to communicate, or as you said, Nigel, feel a bit too small to communicate. But I'm going to talk to you about some of the benefits of communicating. So let me just go back to my slides. Okay, hopefully you can all see those again. So why should you bother communicating on your social and environmental impact? Well, there's actually a lot in it for you, even as a small business. So the first thing that I would say is that customers will generally pay more. for more sustainable services and products. So reports vary, but generally it's a 5 to 10% premium that you can put on sustainable products and services that customers are willing to pay. Secondly, demonstrating that you care is a really great way to retain your customers because it actually reinforces those good feelings they have about buying from you. Thirdly, it's a way of setting yourself apart from your competitors. And whilst the next one might not apply to you specifically, if you're sort of a one-person owner-run business, it's worth just perhaps being aware of that more and more companies are realizing that communicating on these things actually really helps them attract and retain the best employees. So people who align with their vision and can help take their business forward in the direction that they want. It can also open up opportunities for you to collaborate with like-minded people or organizations. And then finally, it can, it can be an opportunity for you to lead by example and inspire others to take action. So in that sense, I would say that no business is too small to be able to to be able to communicate on these things because you can always put yourself out there. It's a question of, as Annie said, time, but also choice. Unfortunately, lots of small businesses like yours end up keeping quiet about their activities, and this has a name. It's called greenhushing. Most people do that out of fear that what they're doing isn't enough to warrant talking about, whilst others might worry that their message will be construed more in terms of greenwashing, and we'll come back to greenwashing in a minute. But I wanted just to sort of cover why, obviously, there's benefits to talking about what you're doing, but why specifically shouldn't we green hush? In the past, people who said that they cared about the environment were branded as tree huggers and oatmeal eating hippies. Well, that's not the case anymore. We're talking to a friendly audience. The vast majority of people are concerned about climate change and inequality, and that varies between 80 to 87 or 89%, depending which reports you read. And so I just want to really reinforce the fact that if you start talking about this stuff, you are talking to people who are ready to receive this information, okay? You're not going to be butting up against a brick wall. Another reason is that green hushing really slows progress. If nobody says anything about what they're doing, then we give the impression that nothing's happening. And if we don't think anyone else is doing anything, then we sort of think, oh, well, if no one else is doing anything, then I'm not going to do anything either. And it also has an impact on finance for social and environmental initiatives for that reason. If funders feel it's unimportant to people because they're not talking about it, then they're much less likely to fund the sorts of initiatives that we might want to see in the future. Greenhushing not only hides the great work that's going on, but it also hides the challenges that we're facing, into the hurdles that we're facing to do things more sustainably and more ethically. And we can't overcome those on our own. So we need to shine a light on some of these challenges and get some help. So that's another good reason not to greenhush. And then finally, I would say by not talking about the things that you're doing, you're really missing an opportunity to build trust with your audience. It's such a vital way to connect with people and to garner support for what you do. So hopefully I've done quite a good job there of persuading you that it's worth communicating this stuff. But I want to sort of go to the other extreme because you need to be aware that when you do communicate, you don't fall into the trap of greenwashing. So greenwashing is giving customers the false impression that your product or service is more environmentally sound than it is. And when the Competition and Markets Authority conducted some research a few years ago, they discovered that over 50% of the environmental claims they uncovered fell into the greenwashing category. So they actually got off their bums and they created some brilliant guidance, which is called the Green Claims Code. and it helps companies navigate how to communicate environmental claims better. And this is their guidance. So I'll just talk you through it briefly. Don't use vague statements. One of the biggest problems is that companies put it out there saying this is an environmentally friendly product, it's sustainable, it's low carbon. And these types of terms are just so vague and unquantifiable that that the Competition and Markets Authority and the Advertising Standards Authority deem them to be greenwashing. Likewise, you do need to be quite careful. I'm not sure if this will apply to anybody here, but it's worth knowing from a personal perspective as well, when you're looking at packaging and what your purchasing choices might be, compostable and recyclable. Compostable is ambiguous because where is it compostable? Lots of things are only compostable in big industrial units, whereas most people might assume that if it said compostable on the packaging, they could put it in their home garden compost, and it's usually not the case. Recyclable is problematic because every local authority in every part of the UK and every part of Europe and worldwide has different recycling facilities. So what might be recyclable somewhere is not elsewhere. So it needs to be really, really clear. So don't be vague. Be honest and accurate. That's a bit of a no-brainer, but unfortunately they had to say this because companies unfortunately aren't. Don't omit important information. This can be equally misleading as actually telling them something false. Where am I? Make your, use fair comparisons. So this means comparing like for like. What they found was that some companies were comparing things that weren't similar enough to be able to hold up their claims on them. Take the full picture of your business into account. So no green lighting. This is another form of greenwashing where companies spotlight small initiatives. So that could be, this is HSBC, we've planted 2 million trees, locking in 20 million tons of carbon or whatever it was, which neglects to mention the funding of fossil fuels that they do, which amounts to considerably more than any savings that tree planting might give them. And then finally, back up your claims with evidence. And we could come on to that in a bit more detail. So that's the Competition and Market Authority's guidance. And I'll include links to this later in the presentation. Now here's my advice, because we don't just want to not greenwash, we actually want to communicate for engagement. So what I would say is start with using easy to understand language. One of the biggest mistakes that I see time and again is companies using terms like net zero and carbon neutral. And the majority of people have no idea what these are. They couldn't define them if you asked them to, and they certainly don't know the difference between them. Sometimes it's useful to use jargon, but if you do use it, then you must explain and define it. As simple as that. Be transparent about where you are and what you're doing. So you don't have to have all the answers. So to Nigel's point, feeling like, oh, well, maybe what I do is too small. Nothing's too small, but just make sure that you put it in context. And I have a good example of this in a minute. I'm going to show you some best practice. Thirdly, back up any claims such as emissions reduction, waste reductions, water reductions, things like that. And this goes into the next point 4, which is make your messages relevant to your audience and contextualize them for them. So, for example, if you've saved, for argument's sake, 500 kilograms of waste, that's quite a hard thing for somebody to imagine or kind of get their minds around. So how many wheelie bins of waste is that? Or how many dumper trucks of waste is that? With water, for example, water savings, how many baths worth of water have you saved, or how many swimming pools of water? That's something that we can wrap our heads around and be like, okay, yeah, this is worth celebrating, or this I can understand. This next one I see an awful lot. Companies, number 5, companies will shout about how much money they've raised for charity, how many hours they've volunteered. They might talk about the value of the pro bono work they've done, but they neglect to mention the difference that it's made. And to check that you're not doing this, I sort of encourage my clients to say, so what? It's like, so, what did you do? And then, so what? What was the difference that made? Because that's going to be the engaging part. It's not very engaging, a number saying you've done a certain amount of fundraising or a certain number of hours. So tell us what the difference is it's made. Number 6 is that work in social and environmental spheres is rarely a success from start to finish. So share those challenges and how you overcame them or didn't, and what your next steps are, because that's going to humanize you basically to your audience and really build that trust that we talked about earlier in the presentation. And then finally, it might sound like a no-brainer, but see if you can find ways to invite people in. Let them know if there's anything that they can do, how they can join you in your efforts, or examples of ways they might emulate some of your work, for example. And before we move on to some of the best practice, I wanted to just pause quickly on labels and certifications, because these can be a way of demonstrating your commitment to social and environmental action, but I would really advise caution here. There's a thing called the Eco Label Index, and they've collected a lot of the eco labels from around the world. They say there's 456 labels across 25 industries. There are a lot more than that. There are many that are missing from there, and there's new ones coming up all the time. This is quite problematic for a few reasons. Most of these labels are completely unregulated. There's no third-party audit, verification, checks. So obviously, with so many labels, most of them are completely unrecognizable and meaningless to people. So I would ask yourself these 3 questions before making any applications for a certification or label. So will your customers recognize the badge or achievement? Is it a reputable certification? And then finally, how much does it cost? And actually, would you be better putting that money into taking more action rather than getting a rubber stamp from a random company on your website or on your product? And the same can go for awards as well. There's a lot of award ceremonies out there that are simply money-making endeavors, and so don't necessarily count for a lot. Okay. So where would you communicate on your social and environmental impact? Essentially in just the same places you would normally communicate. So via your website, your social media accounts, newsletters, and also on a product or service level. And I've got some really good examples that I wanted to share with you. So the first one that I wanted to share is this website, and I think I might just have to come out of the presentation. Yeah, here we are. So Switchfoot is it's a very small owner-run accountancy firm who is B Corp certified, as you can see. And they have this page on their website which is broken down into 3 sections. The hierarchy is not brilliant, but I'll highlight them for you. So it's broken down into what sustainability efforts have we taken so far? And they cover things like banking, clients, taxes, supplier payment, training and education, what they've done in their offices, like replacing gas boilers and things like that, office supplies, travel. They talk about their B Corp score in detail here. Then they go on to talk about what they're currently working on. So that's what they have been doing, what they're currently working on. And they have a few different things here, including their carbon footprint. On just a note on their carbon footprint, they are using zero ecology. So they talk about who they're using to measure their carbon footprint. They acknowledge that this isn't a formal way of doing it, but this is giving them a good idea, and that's absolutely fine. And then they go into this bit. What aren't we able to do? So this is showing complete transparency, which is brilliant. And it's also showing all the different areas that they've considered. And then they conclude with, there's more to do. We know there's more to do, but we're continuously learning. And I just think this is really, really good practice for a small business. It's honest, it's really understandable, it covers all the bases, doesn't sugarcoat anything, includes some data where it's relevant. And so it really sits in that sweet spot that I would encourage you to find between greenhushing, not saying anything, and greenwashing, saying too much and not very well. So yeah, this is really the sweet spot. So just back to my presentation. Okay. The next example I've got is of product level communication. And this here is from a jewelry company called Alex Munro. And they've actually measured the carbon footprint of their products and have indicated the amount of emissions generated by that product on the product page itself. But the good thing about this is they've got this little eye, and if you hover over it, it goes to this. So it gives you a bit of context around it. And then if you click that Learn More button, it takes you to a page on their website that explains their methodology and how they've gone about this. So that's very good. And then finally, I've got another example of an owner-run business who has communicated their B Corp score on LinkedIn, showing how their score has evolved over time, and importantly, telling their audience why it's so important to them and what that means. So that brings me pretty much to the end of my presentation. I just wanted to share with you a few resources that will help, and I'll put these in the chat. So firstly, the Green Claims Code. It's online. There's loads of guidance on there on how to talk about environmental claims, particularly without greenwashing. Advertising Standards Authority also has advice online, and they have some sector-specific advice, which is quite handy. And then finally, I absolutely love this report, which is called Britain Talks Climate and Nature. And it's a survey it's a report following a survey where they've interviewed people across the political spectrum about really what resonates with them. And so there's a lot that can be learned. So if you know what kind of persona the majority of your clients are, then you can really adapt the way that the language that you use and the way that you present the information about the work that you're doing, specifically to engage that audience. So I'd recommend having a look at that as well. And I'll put these in the chat, but otherwise, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you found it helpful, and please do connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like. I will also put my LinkedIn profile link in the chat too.